The Steam Deck is quickly becoming the benchmark for PC gaming. Not because it's so powerful that you can throw anything at it, quite the contrary. It is a minimum performance level that studios are targeting to make sure that their games can run smoothly at 720p. For $399, you can get a base model Steam Deck, and that should unlock the vast majority of PC games in the Steam library. And while this is a great deal, it is still a lot more money than most people can afford to spend. And it is also a primarily portable experience, with a noticeable lack of driver support for Windows and some jank that makes it not quite as suitable as a desktop replacement. That is why we have decided to see if we could meet or exceed Steam Deck performance levels with a little bit of gumption, a lot of bargain hunting, and some good old-fashioned elbow grease. This computer was sold on the cheap because it keeps overheating. Overheating usually means cooling problems, which are caused by a simple lack of maintenance. We tore this computer down and found a rug of hair on its chest that reminded us of Austin Powers. After shaving it, we replaced the thermal paste and then found that the GPU's cooler couldn't be saved. It was just too far gone, and that's likely why it was overheating. The cost of a new cooler is basically the same as buying another slightly better card, so we went that route first, but then we tried spending just a little bit more money and getting a much better card, and it's worked great. The Steam Deck runs on an APU, which means that it has integrated graphics.
Because everybody's got a weakness.
So we don't need a beefy GPU to match its performance. We're stuck with the stock 460 watt power supply. I originally wanted to try an RX 570 that I came across for just $50 and found that it can't power a GPU that needs over 150 watts. So we're going to try to stick closer to the roughly 100 watts of the 5770 it came with. We originally went with a 7790, which did provide a performance improvement, but then I found on eBay a guy who sells GTX 1060 3GB models for just $40, with of course a janky 120mm case fan strapped to it, but he had 10 of these for sale. This is not a one-off deal that you're gonna find, right? They are out there. So I picked up one for just $40 and I couldn't have been happier with the purchase. Just kidding, I absolutely could have. The janky zip tied to it case fan, which I assumed would look janky but be functional, wasn't even functional. So what I ended up doing was spending $15 ordering a GTX 1050 Ti fan off of Amazon and putting that on, which is actually slightly larger than the original fan that would have come on this 1063 gig, but it works phenomenally. The only issue with this fan is that the power cable on it is a little bit too long, so I had to cable manage that as best I could. I originally wanted to go with an AMD card because I wanted to run SteamOS to get that extra level of optimization and reduce the overhead performance loss from running a full OS like Windows, but it didn't quite work out the way I was hoping. I ended up trying initially to run HoloOS, and it just straight up wouldn't work. After putting HoloOS on a USB stick, I tried installing it to a laptop that I have, and it worked just fine, but when I tried to install it on this computer, all I got was a flashing underscore, and in looking it up online, I couldn't find anything to help me troubleshoot this. I ended up going with Chimera OS, which requires a newer video card. I couldn't use the 7790 anymore, so that's why we ended up with the 1063 gig. Chimera OS claims to have driver support for NVIDIA cards, which I think is a little bit crazy of an assertion given how little driver support NVIDIA cards tend to have with Linux, but I figured I'd give it a shot. And to its credit, Chimera OS not only installed, but it worked. Sort of. It was not the experience I was hoping for. I ended up getting a ton of artifacting, which at first I thought was from a failed video card, but then I started digging a little bit deeper and realized that it was probably just the janky NVIDIA drivers. So I went over and I popped in an SSD that had a Windows install on it, and I couldn't be happier with this computer. One thing to keep in mind, because this computer started its life off as a Dell, it has a legitimate Windows install. Basically, the computer will remember its Windows activation as long as you don't change out some of the major components like the motherboard, etc. And so Windows just worked. Windows is just activated and runs flawlessly. Because this computer is an i7-2600K, it actually really performs well. It's still better than even a 6th gen i5-6500, for example, which was a very popular CPU for gaming. I tried originally benchmarking a bunch of things in Windows with the 7790 with the plan of then going over to SteamOS and benchmarking again to see what kind of performance improvements we could get. But unfortunately, the 7790 was never going to work with Apollo OS, and it was too old to be functional with Chimera OS. I was really disappointed. I know that if I had a more modern AMD card, like say an RX 480 or an RX 570, which are cards that I own independently of this build, it would work great, but that was going to require a larger power supply. So we're stuck with Windows, but
that ain't so bad.
because if there's one thing that the Steam Deck doesn't do well, it's Windows. Like, it does it okay, but there are limitations. Whereas this computer not only runs Windows flawlessly, it might actually make for a good video editing rig. If you have an old hard drive around, you can toss that in for extra storage, for example, as a games drive. We had this 1 terabyte, 3.5-inch drive out of the rusty liquid-cooled Powermac G5 we tore down. Check that out here. For under 150 US dollars, actually it was only 155 Canadian, so we were well under the target here, actually leaving a little bit of money left over for you to buy a controller. The performance is definitely better than the Steam Deck. Obviously, it's not portable. I mean, unless you want to lug this thing around, you know, you can take it to LAN parties and stuff, but you're not going to be playing it on the bus.
But that's not the point.
The point is to reach a minimum performance level, knowing that games are going to be targeting this, and it will become relevant for years to come. The Steam Deck's performance level is what we can expect game studios to be targeting, and this computer doesn't just meet it, it far exceeds it. At 1080p, you're getting similar frame rates to what you would be getting on the Steam Deck at 720p. I haven't taken into account the cost of like monitor and peripherals. I assume most people own those right now, but even if you were to buy a cheap set, you're still coming out way under the cost of the Steam Deck. But you know that anything that can run on the Steam Deck will be able to run on this. And that's going to be really nice going forward, knowing that you're not going to have to replace this computer in the next few years. For such a low cost, this actually would even make a decent video editing station if you're a new creator who wanted to get into video editing. One of the things a lot of people with nice gaming computers do is dabble in that sort of stuff because they have the computing power to back it up. Yes, it's only a 3 gig GTX 1060, but it's more than enough. And it will continue to be more than enough for a while to come. The Steam Deck struggles a little bit with 4K 60 video editing, 4K 30 FPS. It's a little laggy, but it's tolerable. This computer will be much better. I know it's a little apples to oranges on this one, but remember, the point is, for very little money these days, you can build yourself a great gaming computer. You just gotta find something with some good bones. And if you have a Steam Deck, why don't you check out this video where I talk about how I edit videos on my Steam Deck every day. And if you want to support the channel, you can join our Patreon and you'll be in the fantastic company of Evan Grill, SKLINK, Charlie. Is that Charlie? What does that say, Dad? CMRLI? I'm sorry, Dan's writing is unique. It's not terrible, it's just hard to read. Larry Collins, Justin Morwin, Ron's Computer Vids, SShrek, Dave's Vintage Apple Tech, Trina Conrad, Garth Beagle, looks like Gardy Beagle, Mac84, I know this is Ethan Palamaro because I hear him read this every week, but it does not look like Ethan. And Branchus Creations, or as this card says, Branchus Creations. See you over there. All right.
Did you get them out or?
Yep.
Okay.